What did your parents teach you that you would never teach your children? Never say a word if someone hurts you. Never object. Never protest, and if you cry, that is your weakness coming through. Don't cry. If you speak out when you are attacked, you will be attacked twice as hard. Silence is the only way through to safety. Say nothing, no matter what. This advice really yucked me over. Where the yuck did you grow up? Sounds like some shady shit there, bud. That may be the worst advice I have ever heard. This happened to me too. Keep crying for nothing, and I will give you a good reason to cry. Sadly, that is not as uncommon as you think. Sometimes, parents won't specifically say that, but this is what our kid minds understand. Yeah, I've heard "I'll give you a reason to cry" so many times, not just by my parents, who usually said it jokingly, but it was still frightening, but others too. I would never compare my kids to other kids. Not only did it make me feel shitty back then, it's made me unnecessarily competitive now, and I seem to compare every little thing of mine with other people's. God, I feel this so hard. Growing up, I wished I had a sibling to hang out with, but given how frequently I was compared to my classmates or the kids of random co-workers, I realize now that being an only child was the best thing that could have happened. As an only child, I was still compared to my mother's friends' kids that I hung out with a lot. The competitive spirit in me probably stems from that when I think about it. Oh, don't worry, you're compared to your siblings all the time. That crying to them will make things worse, not better. My parents still tell me that only weak people cry. Not a huge crier, but it does mess up your ability to process emotions. This was what my father used to say. We're not even talking anymore. Same. My parents keep telling me crying is bad and unhealthy. It has greatly affected my emotional control in a negative way. My parents also told only the weak cry. I'm big. You're small. I'm right. You're wrong. Edit. Wow, this blew up. I never watched Matilda. This was a /Carrick's Kenshin reference. Matilda? LOL. Bless Danny DeVito. You're wormwood. It's time you started acting like one. Be afraid of them. There's a post that keeps circulating that explains how I feel perfectly. It goes something like, I don't want my kids to mess up and feel like they have to hide it from me. I want them to mess up and come to me asking what they should do. Mistakes are a part of life. My mum goes berserk when I make a small mistake like spilling a drink. And I don't want my kids to be afraid of being human. Exactly. When I have kids and they make a mistake, I don't want the first thing they think to be shit. My dad's gonna kill me. I want them to think shit. I have to call my dad. I grew up with my mother who was open to accepting my mistakes, and honestly it was a godsend. I never really had to fear when I had done something wrong, as she seemed to nearly brush them off as something not as major as I would make it seem. Something as small as this really makes a difference, and it has made her a major role model for my life. When I was growing up, she was the person I wanted to be. Clean your plate. As a registered dietitian, I can say that this is hands down the worst thing you can do to your kids' eating habits. It destroys their internal hunger and satiety later in life. Agreed. I think it comes from the Depression era when there wasn't enough food to go around and food was hard to get because everyone was so poor. Back then we didn't have the nutrition programs to give food to children of poor families that we have now. So it was either eat what was given to you or don't eat at all. There was no choice. You still shouldn't say clean your plate. Even my parents agree on this one. Children have different appetite levels, and it may not be the same for all children, and it may not be consistent. One day they may be more hungry than the next and want more food. The next day may be less. Also, you shouldn't make them eat things they don't like. It's not good for them. You can encourage them to try different foods, but if they try it and do not like it, then it should not be forced. One of my family members did this to their kid, and the end result was the child gagging and choking on food because they did not like peas, but the parents thought they should be forced to eat them. This isn't a very nice thing to do just because a child doesn't like a food. You can't force children to eat what they don't like. Please don't do this. My grandmother would plug my nose so I couldn't breathe. So then when I opened my mouth to breath, she would shove food in my mouth. It happened upwards of me being around 6 or 7. Also was told to not complain because it wasn't abuse, and my grandparents didn't have to take me in. Then when I turned 13 they would take dinner away from me. I have suffered with being underweight for a long time and was yelled at for being too skinny. I know I have lots of oppressed memories from all the abuse I suffered. I did reach out for help, but no one believes me because my grandmother is a respected part of the community and she wonders why I have depression. My parents taught me not to share my feelings. It has taken me a long time to be able to do this. I don't want my kids hiding their feelings. There's some really important lessons I had to learn as an adult about expressing feelings, all because of how my parents treated my feelings. I am not repeating that shit. My kids will know all feelings are valid and that feelings are meant to be spoken about without judgment. If you don't feel that's possible, you should be sure to have a safe person to talk to about it. But anxiety and depression are not real health problems. Oh yeah, I've dealt with that one too. Always blaming my sadness on stupid things like my phone. Why do you have an attitude? Yes, me too. When I was in a bad mood it was always because of those damn video games. Like, are you serious? How to rewind the VHS. Remember the first time you watched a DVD and tried to rewind it afterwards? That was a trip to learn that you don't have to rewind DVDs. Yep, just flip them over and watch it in reverse. Happy cake day. Guilt trips. All the damn guilt trips. Got one today from my mother actually. Yug. I hate my mom for trying to guilt trip me so much. She does it so much that I can tell when she is about to, so I can point it out, which makes her guilt trip me on accusing her of guilt tripping me. It's a vicious cycle. Guilt trip. I know this was a typo, but it is so fucking accurate. That parents don't have to apologize if they are wrong because they are parents. I grew up in a big family and many times one sibling would be blamed for another sibling's action, both by parents or other siblings. If I yelled at sibling A for something sibling B did, I would be made to apologize to sibling A. If my mom yelled at me for something sibling A did, after everything was sorted I'd ask, are you going to apologize to me now? And she would say, I don't have to. I'm the adult. I have kids of my own now, and if I do something wrong, I apologize. I'm so lucky that my parents have actually been really good about this. My whole life they realize when they have messed up, and they will apologize. Accidentally whacked my 11-year-old brother's face into the couch and made his tooth bleed. I immediately apologized, made sure he was okay, and then bought him a slushie for good measure. I don't understand why some adults won't apologize to kids. They don't see them as people. Never question authority, your elders. That's the worst one for me. If a person isn't curious and doesn't think by themselves about reality, they are only a shell of a human and will never fully live their own life. And it's a tough thing to learn later in life. In my experience, it's often tied to very oppressive religious upbringings. I stopped having a relationship with my family because every little conversation became a year too young to understand. That my emotions are their fault. Growing up, my mom would get frustrated with me and then lash out. She would then say something like, I yell because you're making me so angry. No, was just a kid doing kid shit. You yelled because you're not in control of your emotions. I've caught my mom doing this shit with my daughter and I call her out on it. You can't put that shit on a kid. I let my daughter know that what she did may have been unkind or need correcting, but she is not responsible for the emotions of the adults around her. My mom did that kind of thing too. She would be a complete BCH because something was going on with her, or if we did something when she was in that mood that wouldn't have pissed her off another time, she would be a BCH. It was so confusing and scary as a kid. It didn't make any fucking sense. Once I grew up and realized she did this, I saw the same patterns with myself. I'm sorry you went through that. My mom is exactly like this. It's like walking on eggshells around her because I never know what her mood is, and just being in the same room with her fills me with so much anxiety. I do the best I can to not disappoint her and it never feels like enough. I hate having to live with her. She makes everyone in my family so much more miserable and I can't stand it. My kid is only barely older than 1 and I'm watching this kind of behavior develop in my wife. I'm hoping it's just the stress of having a 1-year-old and a full-time job. But I don't really see how it's going to be any less stressful as he gets older. She's a good mom though. I don't know how I'll handle it with her if it escalates. But I know I'll always be there for him. There's no reason to be stressed. Everyone gets stressed whether it's something big and life-changing or small and inconvenient. Growing up, my sister and I always heard you shouldn't be stressed about this. This isn't a big thing to stress over and stuff like that. Instead of being taught to manage our stress, we've learned to hide it and bottle it up so our parents wouldn't think we're dramatic or something. Instead of teaching kids to not be stressed, I'd teach them how to manage stress in healthy ways so they can eliminate it or be able to navigate through it easily. My mum made my issues feel so invalid, made me feel like shit. I ended up bottling shit up. They wondered why now and then I'd have these big emotional outbursts, and eventually became depressed. That didn't get taken seriously initially when I opened up about it. Cause of that, I waited and suffered for 6 months for an upcoming appointment for something else with my mum to tell the doctor out of the blue cause of the way she reacted to it. If I have kids, I don't want to make them feel the way my parents made me feel, ever. Came here to say this. I'm 26 and still struggle massively with guilt when I feel stressed because I shouldn't or because other people have it worse, as my parents love to say. Okay, maybe it shouldn't cause stress, but it does. Recognizing that it is causing stress and dealing with the impact that has and trying to mitigate and reduce the stress is important. Even just a bit of empathy when it clearly is something that shouldn't be stressed over is important. How else do you learn to deal with it? As an adult, I would tell my dad I was stressed out and his response would be, "What do you have to be stressed about?" Never allowing me to tell my side of the story. When I was getting in trouble, most of the time it was my fault or something I could have done about it. But there were times that there was an honest explanation that would have explained the situation, and it was always talking back. Just give me a freaking second. Got so much this. I swore never to do this to my children. As a kid, I remember vividly sitting there so fucking confused because my parents just made up a completely bullshit story about what happened based on the small amount of it they witnessed instead of letting me explain what happened. I spent 2 weeks grounded one time because I broke a car window with my football, when I didn't even go outside that day, when it was actually broken when it was hit by a parking car. I couldn't understand why my parents wouldn't let me explain. It's so fucking weird and is a complete abuse of power to just arbitrarily decide right and wrong like that. This kind of parenting is what gets people tossed into retirement homes where they live out their days wondering why their kids don't call or visit. It's a very depressing state of affairs for all involved. I'm sorry you had to live with that. I can relate to this. My mother's mom didn't give two shits about her. My poor mother had to sell her body to get where she is now. Meanwhile, my grandmother is still babying her 2 sons, in real late 40s and early 50s, that should have made lives for themselves years ago. And my grandmother still has the audacity to ask my mom for money. I bet nobody will see this, but here we go. When I was younger, and I was misbehaving, my parents would put me outside, and they wouldn't let me back in, until they thought I had learned my lesson. I was traumatized, and after a few times of sitting outside for at least 30 minutes, most of this was in the fall, and it gets pretty chilly, I developed extreme anxiety, and went over everything I was going to say to them, before I said anything, making sure none of it seemed rude. Now, I'm 15, when they tell me to go outside, because I sit in my room all day talking to friends, I get scared that I did something wrong.